Room number 204. It was on the second floor of a dilapidated old apartment building. This was a room that always felt a little damp, where the windows stayed shut and an unsettling silence hung in the air. Our story begins on one such night. Just past midnight, Ajay woke up suddenly, his heart pounding with fear. Right outside his room, someone was slowly, deliberately, dragging their footsteps across the floor. The sound was incredibly soft, almost imperceptible, yet it was so distinct that it could wake anyone from the deepest sleep. AJ had been hearing this sound for the past 3 nights. But tonight was different. Tonight, the footsteps had stopped. They stopped right at his door. The hallway outside his room fell into a terrifying silence. But through that silence, a faint sound seeped through the wall. It was the sound of breathing. Slow, shallow breaths. It felt as if someone was standing right on the other side of the door, their body pressed against the wood, just waiting. Ajay didn't move. He didn't dare to open the door. His eyes were glued to the small wooden board nailed to the door in front of him, the number 204, his room number. After what felt like an eternity, the same slow, dragging footsteps started again. They turned around and seemed to walk away, the sound fading down the corridor. But this story doesn't end here. In fact, this is precisely where the real fear begins. Let's go back 3 months. Ajay had just arrived in the city, a newcomer looking for a place to live. He needed something cheap, a place where he could be alone, and this old building seemed like the perfect solution. When he met the building owner, a tired-looking old man, he was told that room 204 was available. The owner mentioned with a strange, hollow laugh that the room was always available. It had a reputation. No tenant ever lasted more than a few days. Ajay, being a practical young man, dismissed it as a joke, a way to explain the low rent. When he first saw the room, it seemed normal enough. It was a bit cold, a bit dark, but in the sweltering heat of the city, that felt like a blessing. But from the very first night, he noticed something was off. The room was too quiet, unnaturally quiet. It was as if the thick, damp walls were absorbing every single sound from the outside world, creating a vacuum of silence. On the second night, he thought he heard someone walking around in the room above him. The thud of footsteps, the creak of floorboards. He tried to ignore it, but then he remembered he was on the top floor. There was no room above his. There was only the roof. On the third night, the sounds got closer. He heard whispering right outside his door. It was faint, raspy, like someone was trying to remember something they had long forgotten. It sounded like they were trying to say his name. Ajay, Ajay. The voice was so faint he couldn't be sure if he was imagining it. And that brings us to tonight. The night the footsteps finally reached his door. It was around 3 a.m. The corridor had been silent for hours, and Ajay was just starting to drift back to sleep, telling himself it was all just the strange acoustics of an old building. That's when it happened. The window of his room, which he always kept locked, suddenly creaked open on its own. A gust of wind rushed into the room. It was a cold wind, so bone-chillingly cold that Ajay could see his own breath forming a cloud of white smoke in the air. His eyes darted around the dark room. Then the simple wooden chair in the corner of the room moved. It didn't fall over. It slid a few inches across the floor with a low, scraping sound. Ajay froze in his bed, his body paralyzed with a primal fear. His gaze was fixed on the opposite wall, illuminated by the faint, flickering glow of the tube light from the street outside, and on that wall a shadow was forming. It started as a small, dark patch, but it grew and stretched, taking on a distinct shape. It was a human-like shadow, but it was disturbingly wrong. It was incredibly thin, unnaturally tall, its limbs long and slender, moving as if there were no bones inside its body. It swayed gently, like a reed in the wind. Ajay couldn't breathe. He couldn't scream. He could only watch as this impossible shadow slowly moved from the wall towards the open window. It paused there, its featureless head tilted, as if it were watching someone walking away in the distance, someone Ajay couldn't see. After a long moment, the shadow turned. It rotated slowly, its movements fluid and unnatural, and looked directly towards Ajay's bed. The shadow had no face. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a dark, empty hollow where a face should be. But despite its lack of features, Ajay felt it. He felt it looking at him. He felt it recognize him. The next morning, the building owner was making his rounds when he noticed something strange. The door to room 204 was wide open. He cautiously peered inside. The room was empty, but the window was also open, swaying gently in the morning breeze. But that wasn't the strangest part. On the damp, peeling paint of the wall, there were marks. Dark, smudged marks that looked like they were made by fingers. The marks stretched in a long, continuous line, starting from the window, crossing the entire length of the wall, and ending right above the empty, disheveled bed. When the police were called, the old building owner said only one thing, his voice a weary whisper. "This room, it's not meant for anyone to live in." It never was. He told them a story he had hoped he would never have to tell again. Years ago, a young man had been living in that very room. One night he simply vanished while he was sleeping. His body was never found. No trace of him was ever discovered. Since then, tenants have reported seeing a shadow that roams the room every night as if it's looking for something or someone. Ajay emptied the room that very same day. He packed his few belongings in a frantic haste, not even bothering to fold his clothes. He just wanted to get out. As he walked away from the old, crumbling building, he couldn't resist the urge to look back one last time. He looked up at the second floor, at the window of the room he had just fled. And as he watched, the window of room 204 began to slowly, smoothly close on its own. As if someone inside who had been watching him leave had finally woken up again, and was now waiting for the next person to make the mistake of calling room 204 home.